I want you to know that British food is under attack, and you should be concerned about this, because without food, we as human beings are in trouble, and our pets are too. Also, our wildlife doesn't too good either without food.
It's just knocking the lifeblood out of British agriculture. We have an industry that is on its knees, with farmers don't have the confidence to invest. They have no faith in the length of their relationship with their major buyers.
The founder of Riverford Organics has raised a petition. It's got over 100,000 signatures, and it will be debated in Parliament on January the 22nd. I'm not expecting miracles from this, but he warns, and I think he's absolutely right, that at least half of fruit and veg growers are going to give up producing food. This is a frightening number, and we already are heavily reliant on imports for fresh food. And in cutting off our market with Europe, we are leaving ourselves in a very vulnerable position on food.
More than 100,000 have signed a new petition calling on the government to change the current grocery laws to ensure that supermarkets buy what they committed to buy, pay on time, and agree fair specifications like the size and shape of fruit and veg.
There's many reasons why British food is in crisis. It's been building for decades, but the recent events of Brexit and COVID and the Ukraine war, and latterly Gaza war and the other problems in the Middle East, are all cooking a perfect storm, and add in climate change as well, and we are in a very vulnerable position. But you should be concerned about this, and I am doing these videos to educate people so that you actually start to interact with your MPs and we bring change, because only the power of the people can bring change. And our food being under attack is not good for any of us. But ultimately, it began under Thatcher's reign, when Tesco began to build that much of the controls were handed to supermarkets to get the power to define the price at the end, at the farm gate prices. And that's really when all of our problems began. But the cataclysmic event of Brexit has had the biggest impact of late, because it's given our system a heart attack. When we decided to go into Europe, and particularly when Margaret Thatcher designed and we went into the single market, it was very much like a decision of me to sort of say, instead of being a single person, I want to become a Siamese twin, and I want to share this heart and lungs and organs and blood system. And that's really what we did. We went into Europe, we all defined the same standards, and we shared the same systems, more or less. And that's how it worked. So in doing Brexit, it's actually like going through a separation of Siamese twins. And that it is why it's like having a major heart attack and collapse of your lungs and your liver and everything else all at the same time, because we are rupturing away from this system. And it's worse for food because of the standards and the checks that are needed. So whilst we did get a trade deal with Europe, we still, because Boris Johnson insisted on it, we ended up with non-tariff barriers, which mean that there's paperwork to fill out and then there's SPS checks. And so in doing this awful deal, which was a disaster, they then decided to delay doing the checks for imports coming via the EU. And that has made the British market completely unfair and unlevel. And this is why we had the pig crisis a couple of years ago, because European meat was coming in and undercutting our meat. At the same time, our processors weren't dealing with the loss of freedom of movement and the loss of labour, and it meant that a lot of pig farms went out of business. Then recently we've had this with eggs, where cheaper eggs have come in and undercut our high standard British eggs, and a lot of egg farms have gone out of business. The same has been happening with apples. The supermarkets have been buying cheaper apples from further away and expecting our growers to be selling their apples at a cost below the cost of production. And don't forget that Brexit has removed food subsidies as well, removed our labour source and made our market unfair. And all of these things are meaning that food in Britain is contracting at a rate of knots. And it defies belief that panic hasn't set in government. It ought to set in. But if you listen to most people who are involved in agriculture, they're all saying the same thing. And that's why you should pay attention, because, as I keep telling you, it's your food. And geopolitical events are meaning that this is going to be, food security is going to be such an enormous issue in the next year, particularly if China decides to invade Taiwan, which, a few years ago seemed unthinkable. Now it isn't unthinkable.
The government says it is committed to tackling contractual unfairness in the agri-food supply chain. It's launched a public consultation, and the petition will be debated in Parliament in January.
Once you appreciate that Brexit has ensured that even within the United Kingdom, English farmers are worse off because the devolved nations have continued with food subsidies and English farmers have been forced into environmental schemes or no schemes at all and having to intensify their production. Then when you mix in the European farmers who do not have the trade barriers that we have, who also are subsidised and have freedom of movement, so they're not facing the labour problems that we are, and they're not facing the bad trade deals that we have, which are only going to get worse every year, then you understand why Brexit is so bad for food and farming.